My mother left a voicemail that changed my life forever. She said that I was out, that I should not come back, and that they were moving on without me. I listened to her words while standing in my empty apartment, completely surrounded by moving boxes. I did not cry or beg or ask for an explanation. I just texted back a single word. Okay. Then I opened my laptop and moved on first. I locked the trust, I canceled the house deal, and I went to sleep. By the next morning, they had left 50 missed calls and a panicked message from their lawyer stating they had a serious problem. I laughed loudly and replied with the brutal truth. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach toxic family members a lesson they will never forget. My name is Fiona and I am 33 years old. I work as a forensic accountant, a job that requires meticulous attention to detail, endless patience, and the ability to track every single cent that moves through an account. For my entire adult life, those same skills were exploited by my own family. I was the reliable one. I was the quiet workhorse who fixed their messes, managed their taxes for free, and kept the illusion of our perfect wealthy American family completely intact. But standing in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a heavy roll of packing tape, that illusion finally shattered. I had spent the last 3 weeks methodically packing my life into identical brown cardboard boxes. I was exhausted. My back ached and my hands were dry from handling packing materials. I was preparing to move out of my modest apartment and into the custom guest suite of the massive new family compound my parents were purchasing. It was a sprawling $2.5 million luxury estate in a highly exclusive gated community. The property featured a main house for my parents, a detached carriage house for my younger sister, and a separate guest wing that was supposed to be mine. I was the one who had handled all the complex financial paperwork for this massive purchase. I was the one who spent hours on the phone with the mortgage brokers, the title company, and the real estate agents, ensuring every document was flawless so the closing could happen smoothly the very next morning at 9 o'clock. More importantly, I was the primary financial backer. My parents had the social status, but their liquid assets were tied up. I was the one who had quietly transferred a $500,000 down payment of my own hard-earned money into the escrow account to secure the deal for them. I did it because family was supposed to take care of family. I did it because I believed foolishly that this compound would finally be a place where we could all live together with mutual respect. My phone vibrated violently against the granite surface of my kitchen island, breaking the quiet stillness of my half-empty apartment. The screen lit up, displaying a carefully staged photograph of my mother, Sylvia. She looked perfect as always, with her expensive blonde highlights and a designer scarf draped effortlessly over her shoulders. I stared at the glowing screen. I was too tired to answer. I was too drained from packing my kitchen supplies to deal with whatever minor crisis she was calling to complain about. I let the phone ring until the screen went dark. A minute later, a notification chimed. You have one new voicemail. I set the packing tape down on the counter, wiped my dusty hands on my jeans, and tapped the screen to play the message on speakerphone. Fiona, darling, my mother began. Her voice was dripping with that artificial sugary sweetness she always used right before she delivered a crushing blow. It was the tone she used at country club luncheons when insulting a waiter, or the tone she used when telling me a dress made me look heavy. Change of plans, she said casually, as if she were talking about changing a dinner reservation instead of altering my entire living situation. I was just speaking with your sister. Courtney and Jared have been walking through the new property, and they realized they are going to need a lot more space than we originally thought. You know how they are planning to start trying for a baby soon? They decided they really need that guest wing for their future children and for Jared's home office. I stopped breathing. The air in my apartment suddenly felt incredibly thin. Courtney was 29 years old, engaged to a slick social climbing man named Jared, and entirely accustomed to having the world handed to her on a silver platter. She had never worked a real job in her life. She called herself a lifestyle influencer, which essentially meant she spent her days taking photos of expensive lattes paid for by our parents. Jared was no better. He was a man who wore suits that were a little too shiny, always talking about his big investment ideas, while actually contributing nothing. Sylvia continued speaking through the phone, her tone utterly devoid of empathy. So, darling, you understand. You are single, and you just work at an office all day anyway. You do not really need all that room. We really do not have space for you at the new compound anymore. I stared at the cardboard box sitting on my counter. It was labeled Fiona's Kitchen, ready to be loaded onto the moving truck first thing in the morning. Also, Sylvia added, sounding mildly annoyed now. Do not bother coming back to the old house either. We already handed over the keys to the new owners this afternoon. You will have to figure something out for yourself. Maybe rent a small place closer to your accounting firm. We are moving on without you. We will talk to you eventually. Bye now. The voicemail ended. The automated voice informed me that I could press 1 to save the message or press 7 to delete it. I stood completely frozen in the quiet kitchen. For 33 years, I had been the scapegoat. I had been the one pushed into a pragmatic, unglamorous career by my father Howard, simply so they would have someone to manage the family books. I had been the one expected to sacrifice my time, my money, and my sanity to ensure that Courtney could pursue her passions without ever having to face the consequences of her actions. I had funded their lifestyle with my professional labor, and recently with my actual savings. Any other person might have broken down right there. Any other daughter might have collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably at the cruelty of her own mother, casually rendering her homeless the day before a massive move. Another woman might have immediately called back crying and begging for an explanation, pleading to be included, reminding them of the $500,000 she had just provided to secure their dream home. But I did not cry. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream or throw my phone against the wall. Instead, a strange, absolute calm washed over me. It was not the numbness of shock. It was the absolute crystalline clarity of a woman who had finally been pushed past her breaking point. The emotional cord that had bound me to my toxic family, the desperate lingering hope that they would one day love me as much as they loved Courtney, simply snapped. They did not want me. They wanted my utility. They wanted my money. And now that they believed the house deal was finalized and the money was locked in, they thought they could simply discard me like an empty envelope. They thought I was just a quiet, obedient spinster accountant who would swallow the humiliation, rent a miserable little studio apartment, and continue to manage their taxes from afar while they lived in a luxury mansion funded by my life savings. I picked up my phone. I opened my text message thread with my mother. I did not type out a long, emotional paragraph. I did not demand my money back or threaten them. I wanted them to sleep soundly tonight, completely oblivious to the hurricane that was about to hit them. I typed a single word. Okay. I hit send. Then I placed the phone face down on the counter. I turned away from the moving boxes. I walked over to my small dining table, which was currently serving as my temporary home office. I sat down in the wooden chair. I reached out and lifted the silver lid of my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating my face in the dimming light of the late afternoon. The fan whirred softly, a low hum of power waiting to be directed. They thought they were moving on without me. They thought they had secured their perfect future and left me in the dust. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. They had forgotten exactly what I do for a living, and they had drastically underestimated exactly how much power I was quietly holding in my hands. The conflict was no longer a one-sided emotional beating. It was about to become a calculated, systematic dismantling of their entire reality. I rested my fingers on the keyboard, took a deep breath, and prepared to make my first move. My fingers hit the keyboard with a heavy, rhythmic precision. I did not open my personal checking account. I bypassed my own modest financial footprint and navigated straight to the master administrative banking portal. I had memorized the complex passwords and security routing numbers years ago. The screen blinked, loading a sterile dashboard filled with cascading columns of digital numbers. With a few rapid keystrokes, I pulled up the primary ledger for my parents' accounts. For my entire adult life, I had been the family's unpaid financial manager. I was the silent workhorse who balanced the sheets, filed the tax returns, and hid the glaring discrepancies of their unsustainable lifestyle from the Internal Revenue Service. It was not a role I had chosen. When I was 18 years old, full of ambition, and hoping to study architecture, my father Howard had called me into his wood-paneled study. I still remember the smell of his expensive cigars and the patronizing tone of his voice. He had poured himself a glass of scotch and laid down the law. "Art does not pay the bills, Fiona," he had told me. "You need to get a practical degree in accounting. We need someone smart in the family to manage the books and keep the business running smoothly." What he actually meant was that they needed a permanent free servant to manage their reckless spending. I obeyed. I sacrificed my own creative passions and spent 4 grueling years grinding through tax codes, financial law, and forensic auditing classes. I graduated at the top of my class and secured a demanding job at a top-tier firm. Meanwhile, my younger sister Courtney was handed a completely different set of rules. While I was pulling all-nighters studying corporate tax law, Courtney dropped out of 3 separate liberal arts programs. She eventually declared that traditional college stifled her creativity. My parents immediately bought her a luxury condo and fully funded her new career as a lifestyle influencer. I stared at the screen, my eyes tracking the recent transactions on Courtney's supposedly independent business account. The reality of her success was right there in the digital ink. A $300 charge at a high-end botanical spa. An $800 purchase at a boutique that sold nothing but designer athleisure wear. $2,000 for a VIP table at a nightclub in Miami. All of it was neatly categorized under business development for her LLC. The company itself generated absolutely zero revenue. Every single month, an automatic deposit of $5,000 transferred from my parents' main account directly into Courtney's checking account. I was the one who processed those transfers. I was the one who took her crumpled, ridiculous receipts and forced the math to work so she would not be flagged for tax fraud. My jaw tightened as I scrolled through my father's expenses. Howard had recently written off a $60,000 country club membership as a medical expense, claiming the golf course was necessary for his physical therapy. My mother, Sylvia, used corporate funds to buy luxury vehicles, categorizing them as company cars, despite the fact that she had not worked a day in her life. I had spent a decade cleaning up their messes, swallowing my resentment, and keeping the peace. They demanded my labor, but they never offered me respect. I closed their personal ledgers. The true power I held over my family was not in their checking accounts. With a deliberate click of my mouse, I opened a new, highly encrypted tab on my browser. The system prompted me for a 2-factor authentication code and a master security password. I typed it in flawlessly. The banner at the top of the screen loaded in stark, authoritative black letters. The Beatrice Trust. My grandmother Beatrice had been a formidable, sharp-minded woman who built a highly lucrative real estate empire entirely from scratch. When she passed away 5 years ago, she left behind a massive estate. To this day, Sylvia, Howard, and Courtney firmly believe that a team of ruthless, unyielding corporate lawyers at a prestigious downtown firm controls the trust. They believe this because it is exactly what I designed them to believe. For half a decade, my family had treated me like a glorified administrative assistant regarding the estate. They would hand me their absurd budget requests, demanding luxury vacations or new cars, and instruct me to take the paperwork to the stuffy men in suits for approval. Whenever a request was denied, whenever their monthly disbursement was strictly capped, they directed their furious rage at the phantom corporate lawyers. My mother would snap at me for being a timid secretary. She would yell at me to push the lawyers harder, to be a better liaison, and to demand the money she felt she was owed. What my parents did not know, what they could never fathom in their wildest dreams of entitlement, was that the corporate lawyers worked exclusively for me. Beatrice had seen right through her own daughter's greed. She knew that Sylvia and Howard would bleed the family legacy dry within a few short years to fund their country club lifestyle and Courtney's endless influencer delusions. In the final months of her life, Beatrice had called me to her hospital room. I can still recall the steady hum of the medical monitors and the firm grip of her frail hand. She looked me dead in the eye and bypassed her own children entirely. She legally named me, her quiet, pragmatic granddaughter, as the sole trustee and legal executor of her entire estate. I held the absolute legal authority over every single asset, every property, and every cent. I was the one who quietly approved their standard disbursements. I was the one who denied their ridiculous requests for yachts and luxury sports cars. I paid a hefty monthly retainer to a senior partner at a downtown law firm simply to act as the terrifying face of the trust. Whenever Sylvia called the firm to scream about needing more cash, the partner would put her on hold, text me for permission, receive my denial, and then calmly tell my mother that the strict board of trustees had rejected her request. The irony was deliciously cold. I had been the entire board all along. I held the absolute power completely hidden behind the mundane facade of the family accountant. I navigated past the main trust dashboard and opened the external banking portal. I clicked on the specific escrow account tied to tomorrow's real estate closing. The screen populated with the details of the $2.5 million luxury compound. The closing was scheduled for exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. My parents loved to project immense wealth, and they had the social standing to impress the real estate agents, but they completely lacked the necessary liquid capital to close a deal of this magnitude. They needed a massive down payment to secure the jumbo loan from the bank. The number glowed brightly on the monitor in front of me: $500,000. It was not money from the Beatrice Trust. It was my own personal money. I had saved that $500,000 by working grueling 80-hour weeks at my forensic accounting firm. I had saved it by living in a cramped, outdated apartment. I had saved it by skipping vacations, wearing cheap clothes, and fiercely protecting every annual bonus I ever earned. 3 months ago, Sylvia had approached me with glossy brochures of the luxury compound. She had played the role of the loving mother perfectly. She convinced me to put up my life savings for the down payment. She framed it as an investment in our shared future. She promised me that the beautiful detached guest wing of the compound would be my permanent sanctuary. She told me I could finally stop paying rent live in luxury and crunch my numbers in peace away from the noise of the main house. It was all a calculated trap. They never intended to give me the guest wing. They just needed my liquid capital to cross the finish line with the bank. Courtney and her slick fiancé Jared wanted the space for themselves, and Sylvia was more than happy to throw me out on the street the moment she thought my money was locked in. I stared at the escrow screen. The cool light of the monitor washed over my face in the darkening apartment. The $500,000 was sitting right there in the digital portal, waiting to be irrevocably released to the sellers at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Once those funds cleared escrow, my life savings would be converted into property equity owned jointly by Sylvia and Howard. I would be left with absolutely nothing but an empty, boxed-up apartment and a revoked invitation to my own home. They thought they had outsmarted me. They assumed I was too passive and too beaten down to fight back. They thought they could secure their perfect future and simply leave me behind in the dust. They had forgotten that I dismantle corporate fraudsters for a living. I track hidden assets and execute financial ruin upon arrogant people every single day at my job. I rested my hands on the keyboard. The time for being the quiet peacemaker was officially over. It was time to show them exactly who they had been messing with. My index finger hovered over the trackpad of my laptop. On the screen, the portal for the regional title company glowed in a sterile clinical blue. There it was, $500,000. My money. My late nights, my early mornings, my missed social life, all reduced to a tidy string of digits sitting in a holding account. The escrow agreement had been drafted meticulously. As the primary financial backer, my signature was required to release the funds to the sellers. But until the clock struck 9 tomorrow morning, that money remained entirely under my legal control. I had the unilateral right to withdraw it at any moment. I thought about the sheer audacity of my mother. Sylvia had essentially demanded that I buy her a luxury estate, only to evict me via voicemail 12 hours before the keys changed hands. She believed that because the money was already parked in escrow, the transaction was an unstoppable train. She assumed the banking system was a magical automated machine that I could not halt. She had zero understanding of how wire transfers, escrow holds, and mortgage underwriting actually functioned. To Sylvia, money just appeared when she wanted it. She never considered the mechanics of how it moved, or more importantly, how it could be stopped. The interface offered a simple drop-down menu. I selected the option labeled Withdraw Funds. A warning box popped up immediately, filling the center of my screen with bold red text. It cautioned me that removing funds at this stage would result in a breach of the preliminary loan conditions. It warned that the mortgage application tied to this escrow account would be immediately rendered null and void. The bank would not fund the remaining $2 million if the primary down payment vanished. The entire house deal would instantly collapse. I did not hesitate. I clicked the box acknowledging the risks. That was click number 1. The system prompted me to select a destination account for the withdrawal. I selected my personal high-yield savings account at a completely different banking institution, a bank my parents did not even know I used. I typed in the routing numbers with muscle memory. I authorized the full amount, $500,000 and 0 cents. I hit the confirmation button. That was click number 2. A final security screen appeared. The bank required a 2-factor authentication code to process a withdrawal of this magnitude. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, lighting up next to the spot where I had listened to my mother's callous voicemail just minutes ago. I picked up the phone, read the 6-digit security code, and typed it into the empty field on my laptop. I stared at the final submit button. For a brief second, I pictured Courtney and Jared measuring the guest wing for a nursery. I pictured my mother picking out custom drapery for the grand foyer, completely certain that her spineless, reliable accountant daughter was currently crying in a studio apartment packing her bags for a cheap rental. I hit submit. That was click number 3. A small circular loading icon spun on the screen. It spun for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then the screen flashed bright green. Transaction successful. Funds have been initiated for transfer. The escrow account balance dropped from $500,000 to 0. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. A wave of pure, unadulterated adrenaline rushed through my veins. It was the most intoxicating feeling I had ever experienced. I had just killed the deal. The massive, beautiful $2.5 million luxury compound was gone. I leaned back in my wooden dining chair and smiled, visualizing exactly how tomorrow morning was going to play out. At 8:30, my parents would arrive at the plush, mahogany-filled office of their real estate attorney. Sylvia would be wearing her best celebratory outfit. Howard would be holding his expensive fountain pen ready to sign the final deeds. Courtney and Jared would be sitting in the corner holding hands and dreaming of their stolen guest wing. They would drink sparkling water and make polite small talk with the sellers. And then the escrow agent would log into this exact same portal to authorize the final wire transfer to the seller's bank. The agent would stare at the screen in complete confusion. The agent would refresh the page. They would call the bank. The bank would inform them that the primary funder, Fiona, had executed a total withdrawal of the down payment. The mortgage underwriters would receive an automated alert that the loan parameters had been violated. The bank would instantly pull their funding. The real estate attorney would have to look across that mahogany table and inform Sylvia and Howard that they were totally, catastrophically broke. They would be humiliated in front of the sellers. They would be publicly exposed as frauds who could not close a deal. The moving trucks, which were currently packed with all of their worldly possessions and scheduled to arrive at the new compound at 10 o'clock, would have absolutely nowhere to go. My parents had already surrendered the keys to their old house. By tomorrow afternoon, they would be essentially homeless, sitting in a driveway with 2 massive moving trucks and 0 options. The thought of it was deeply, profoundly satisfying. I closed the escrow tab, feeling a massive weight lift from my shoulders. My life savings were safe. My financial future was secure. I had defended myself against a massive financial theft disguised as a family investment. But as the initial high of the successful withdrawal began to fade, the quiet reality of my apartment settled back in. I looked around at the brown cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. I looked at the bare shelves in my kitchen. The adrenaline washed away, leaving behind the cold, calculating logic that made me brilliant at my job. My heart rate began to steady, and my forensic accountant brain kicked into high gear. I analyzed the situation logically, mapping out the next 24 hours like a tactical flowchart. What would Sylvia do when the house deal collapsed? She would scream. She would cry. She would call my phone 100 times, leaving furious, threatening voicemails. She would demand that I reverse the transaction. And when I refused, when I finally maintained a boundary and ignored her calls, she would pivot to her backup plan. She always had a backup plan. Sylvia would pick up her phone and call the downtown corporate lawyers who managed the Beatrice Trust. She would put on her most demanding, authoritative voice. She would tell the lawyers that there had been a catastrophic banking error. She would demand an immediate emergency disbursement of $500,000 from the trust to save the real estate deal. She would claim it was a necessary family expense that fell well within her rights as a beneficiary. And because they believed those lawyers were soulless corporate machines, Howard would back her up. He would threaten to sue the firm if they did not release the funds instantly. Courtney would cry in the background, playing the victim. They would unleash the full force of their entitlement upon the Beatrice Trust to bail themselves out of the disaster I had just created. I stared at the black screen of my laptop. Stopping the house deal was a brilliant tactical strike, but it was just a single battle. It was not the war. If they could simply tap into my grandmother's massive estate to replace my stolen down payment, they would face no real consequences. They would buy the house anyway. They would move into their luxury compound, laugh about my pathetic attempt at rebellion, and continue to live like royalty on Beatrice's dime. They would spend the next decade draining the trust dry to fund their country club memberships, their designer wardrobes, and Courtney's endless parade of failed business ventures. Withdrawing my own money was self-preservation. It protected my past, but it did not secure my future, and it certainly did not secure my permanent freedom from their financial demands. To truly break free, to permanently dismantle their ability to use and abuse me, I could not just pull my own funds. I had to cut off their entire supply line. I had to sever the golden umbilical cord that kept their extravagant lifestyle afloat. I had to lock the vault. I realized with chilling clarity that simply walking away was not an option. If I walked away now, they would hunt me down. They would harass me at my accounting firm. They would show up at my apartment building. They would smear my name to every single relative, claiming I had gone insane and tried to ruin their lives out of sheer jealousy. I needed to render them completely powerless. I needed them to be so consumed by their own financial ruin that they would not have the energy or the resources to come after me. I needed to dig into the Beatrice Trust. I reached out and opened the laptop again. The screen illuminated the dark room. I stretched my fingers, feeling the familiar, comforting logic of numbers and ledgers calling out to me. I had spent years quietly processing their receipts, forcing their ridiculous expenses into neat, tax-compliant categories to keep the peace. I had turned a blind eye to their greed because challenging it would have caused a family civil war. But the war had already been declared via a casual voicemail. The peace was dead. I opened a new, highly secure browser window. I needed to look at their spending not as an obedient daughter trying to balance a checkbook, but as a ruthless forensic auditor looking for blood. I needed to find every single cent they had misappropriated, every dollar they had stolen from Beatrice's legacy, and I needed to use it as the ultimate weapon. I opened the Beatrice Trust Master Portal. The screen glowed with a crisp white background and dense columns of financial data. For 5 years, I had visited this exact web page every single Friday. I used to log in with a heavy heart, bracing myself for the headache of categorizing my family's chaotic spending. I used to look at the numbers and feel nothing but exhaustion. Today, I looked at the numbers and felt like a hunter stepping into the woods. I cracked my knuckles and typed in my master credentials. The system granted me full administrative access to the entire estate hierarchy. My grandmother had structured her wealth meticulously, dividing it into operational capital investment portfolios and individual beneficiary trusts. As the sole executor, I had a God mode view of every transaction, every wire transfer, and every cleared check. In the past, whenever I noticed a discrepancy, I would quietly fix it. If my mother overdrafted her allowance, I would shuffle funds from a generic emergency account to cover the bounce fee. I did it because confronting them meant enduring hours of screaming phone calls. I did it to buy peace. But peace was a luxury I could no longer afford and frankly a lie I no longer wanted to maintain. I navigated to the search bar and pulled up the sub-account designated for Courtney. 3 years ago, my parents had demanded a massive capital injection from the trust to fund my sister's highly anticipated business venture. They claimed she was launching an exclusive high-end organic skincare line. They submitted beautifully formatted business plans and aggressive budget projections. I had approved the initial seed money because the documentation met the legal requirements of the trust. I had authorized regular monthly draws for research development and marketing. I clicked on the vendor payment history for Courtney's limited liability company. I needed to see exactly where that seed money had actually gone over the last 36 months. I pulled the data into a fresh spreadsheet and applied a rapid sorting algorithm to isolate the highest expenditures. The results populated instantly and my jaw tightened. There was no skincare line. There had never been a skincare line. The vendor names on the outgoing wire transfers were not chemical manufacturers or packaging distributors. They were luxury European car dealerships and high-end fashion houses. I traced a $40,000 wire transfer labeled as product testing and chemical analysis. The routing number matched a boutique luxury auto broker in Miami. Sylvia had used her daughter's fake business account to purchase a brand new sports car, completely bypassing the strict vehicle allowance limit set by my grandmother's original trust parameters. I kept digging, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I opened the digital copies of the receipts Sylvia had submitted for marketing expenses. She had claimed $75,000 over 2 years for promotional photo shoots, brand ambassador wardrobes, and location scouting. I cross-referenced the merchants. The money had gone directly to designer boutiques in Paris and Milan. Sylvia had literally bought herself a closet full of haute couture custom handbags and diamond jewelry, then illegally coded the purchases as necessary business overhead for a company that produced absolutely nothing. It was a masterclass in entitlement. Sylvia had treated the Beatrice Trust like a personal piggy bank, hiding her rampant consumerism behind the guise of supporting her golden child's entrepreneurial dreams. And Courtney was entirely complicit. I found email records where Courtney had forwarded the fake invoices to the trust management portal, knowing full well she was helping her mother siphon thousands of dollars from the estate. They were thieves dressed in designer silk, stealing from a dead woman's legacy to fund their shallow vanity. I highlighted the fraudulent rows in bright, glaring red. The total for Sylvia's high-fashion embezzlement sat at a staggering $180,000. But I knew I was only halfway done. I closed Courtney's folder and opened the primary beneficiary account assigned to my father. Howard always presented himself as a distinguished ethical businessman. He loved to lecture me about fiscal responsibility and the importance of a strong work ethic. He loved to act as though he was the rightful heir to the Beatrice empire, temporarily inconvenienced by the corporate lawyers who officially managed the estate. I pulled up his tax deduction submissions for the previous 3 fiscal years. Howard had a specific account designated for health and wellness. Grandma Beatrice had been a generous woman, and she had specifically outlined that any genuine medical emergency or necessary therapeutic care for her children would be fully covered by the trust. I sorted Howard's medical expenses by dollar amount. A recurring massive charge immediately jumped to the top of the screen. $60,000 billed annually, categorized strictly under rehabilitative physical therapy and mobility assistance. I knew my father's medical history perfectly well. He had mild arthritis in his left knee. He took over-the-counter pain medication and occasionally complained when it rained. He certainly did not require $60,000 a year in intensive physical therapy. I dug into the vendor identification numbers. I traced the outgoing checks through the banking clearinghouse system. The destination was not a hospital, a specialized clinic, or a private medical practice. The funds were being deposited directly into the primary operating account of the Oak Ridge Valley Country Club, the most exclusive, wildly expensive private golf and tennis club in the state. My father was embezzling trust funds to pay his exorbitant country club dues. He had actually forged medical documents from a friendly, highly compensated private doctor to classify his daily rounds of golf as required cardiovascular therapy. He had classified his hefty bar tabs at the clubhouse as nutritional supplements. He had even managed to write off the purchase of a custom leather-seated golf cart as a necessary motorized mobility aid. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it made my blood run cold. Howard had looked me in the eye at family dinners swirling his expensive scotch and complained about the rising cost of health care, all while systematically robbing his own mother's estate to pay for his elite social status. I highlighted Howard's fraudulent deductions in the same glaring red. The total hit $220,000. I merged the spreadsheets. The calculator program on my laptop ran the final tally. $400,000. $400,000 stolen, laundered, and hidden behind fake business accounts and forged medical notes. This was not just a case of wealthy people overspending their allowance. This was grand theft. This was wire fraud, tax evasion, and a direct violation of fiduciary duty. If the Internal Revenue Service ever audited these specific accounts, Sylvia and Howard would not just face steep fines, they would face federal prison time. For years, they had relied on me to be the quiet, obedient daughter who made the math work. They assumed I was too scared of their anger to ever look too closely at the actual documents. They handed me the puzzle pieces and ordered me to make them fit, confident that I would never dare to turn the puzzle over and see the ugly criminal truth printed on the back. They were wrong. I opened my forensic auditing software. I did not just save the spreadsheets. I began to construct an ironclad, undeniable portfolio of evidence. I generated high-resolution copies of every fake invoice, every cleared check, and every unauthorized wire transfer. I matched the routing numbers to the luxury car dealerships and the country club accounts. I created clear, easy-to-read financial flowcharts that traced the stolen money straight from the Beatrice Trust directly into Sylvia's closet and Howard's golf bag. I worked for 3 solid hours, fueled by a decade of suppressed rage and the sharp, precise focus of a professional auditor. My hands flew across the keyboard, building a legal weapon so powerful it could decimate their entire reality in a single strike. I cross-checked every single transaction against the legal parameters set by my grandmother, ensuring that my documentation was completely bulletproof. There could be no shadows, no gray areas, and absolutely no room for interpretation. When I finished compiling the evidence, I exported the data into a single, highly encrypted master file. I titled it The Beatrice Audit. It was 50 pages of irrefutable proof. There were no loopholes. There was no room for Sylvia to gaslight her way out of it or for Howard to bluster his way into a denial. The numbers told a flawless, brutal story. I sat back and looked at the final digital report. The realization of what I held in my hands washed over me. I had the power to destroy them completely. I had the power to strip away their unearned wealth, expose them as common thieves to their elite social circle, and leave them entirely at the mercy of the legal system. But having the weapon was not enough. I needed to deploy it with maximum devastation. Stopping the house deal tomorrow morning would trigger their initial panic. They would immediately try to access their primary trust accounts to secure emergency cash. They would try to pay the moving trucks and salvage their dignity. They would expect their golden safety net to catch them just like it always did. I minimized the audit report and brought the main administrative dashboard back to the center of my screen. I looked at the master controls for their debit cards, their credit lines, and their automated monthly disbursement checks. I had found the rot. I had documented the disease. Now it was time to amputate. It was time to show my parents what moving on without me actually looked like. I shifted my focus from the audit report to the primary security dashboard of the Beatrice Trust. Grandma Beatrice had not just made me an executor in name only. She had been a ruthless, brilliant businesswoman who understood human nature better than anyone. She knew that wealth attracted parasites, and she had built this digital infrastructure with ironclad defenses. She had granted me unilateral, undisputed authority to protect the estate from predators. The legal framework was embedded right into the software, a digital fail-safe designed specifically for this exact nightmare scenario. The system offered various levels of security measures. A level 1 freeze required a simple click, usually reserved for a misplaced credit card or a suspicious online purchase. What I needed was the nuclear option. I scrolled down to the deepest security settings and initiated a level 4 fraud lockdown. This protocol was not a temporary hold. It was a catastrophic financial quarantine. It required the immediate submission of supporting evidence and signified active, ongoing financial crimes against the estate. I uploaded the 50-page audit report I had just meticulously compiled. The system processed the PDF, encrypting it and securing it in the legal vault. The progress bar hit 100%. The protocol was active. Now I had to sever the individual lifelines. I targeted Sylvia first. My mother carried a heavy custom metal platinum card in her designer purse. I remembered countless dinners where she would drop that card onto restaurant tables with a loud theatrical clatter, making absolute sure everyone nearby knew exactly how wealthy she was. She treated that piece of metal like a magic wand, waving it to command respect, to demean retail workers, and to buy her way out of any inconvenience. I located the specific card number in the master registry. The status indicator glowed a vibrant, healthy green, showing that the account was in perfect standing with hundreds of thousands of dollars in available credit. I dragged my cursor over the status bar. I selected the option marked Suspend due to fraudulent activity. The green light vanished instantly, replaced by a harsh, glaring red warning label. That prestigious platinum card was now nothing more than a shiny, useless paperweight. If Sylvia tried to buy a coffee tomorrow morning, the register would beep and decline. If she tried to book a flight, the system would reject it. Next, I moved to my father. Howard was a man built entirely on routine and manufactured prestige. He possessed a highly exclusive black card tied directly to the trust's operational capital, which he used almost exclusively to impress his business associates. He paid for expensive steak dinners, premium scotch, and those completely fraudulent physical therapy sessions at his elite country club. I found his profile in the user directory. I did not just freeze his card. I went much deeper. I opened the vendor auto pay settings. The Oak Ridge Valley Country Club was scheduled to pull its hefty monthly maintenance and locker fee in exactly 3 days. I deleted the authorization entirely. When the club tried to process his membership dues, the transaction would instantly bounce. The accounting office at his precious golf club would send him a humiliating automated email about insufficient funds. I clicked the freeze button on his primary card. The green light turned red. Howard was financially paralyzed. Then came Courtney. My sister was perhaps the most parasitic drain on the entire estate. Courtney operated under the staggering delusion that she was a self-made entrepreneur, a brilliant business mind building a lifestyle brand. The reality was that her entire existence was subsidized by a quiet, automated digital pipeline that I maintained. I opened the scheduled transfers menu on her profile. There it was, sitting at the top of the queue. The recurring $5,000 automated deposit set to hit her personal checking account at the end of the week. I hit cancel. The system generated a warning pop-up asking if I was absolutely sure I wanted to permanently delete this recurring transaction. I clicked yes with swift, absolute certainty. Next, I found the corporate expense cards assigned to her fake skincare limited liability company. I disabled every single one of them. Courtney could no longer buy designer athleisure wear on Grandma Beatrice's dime. She could no longer book VIP tables in Miami under the guise of networking. She could no longer pay her high-end wedding planner using stolen trust money. Her glamorous influencer lifestyle had just been permanently defunded. But the individual plastic cards were just the branches of the problem. I needed to chop down the trunk of the tree. The Beatrice Trust issued massive, overarching monthly disbursement checks to Sylvia and Howard. These were the foundational funds that paid for their luxury car leases, their exorbitant grocery bills at organic markets, their private chefs, and their general ridiculous upkeep. The next batch of massive disbursements was currently queued in the outgoing ledger, waiting for my final executive approval before the end of the month. I highlighted the entire batch of pending transfers. I moved my mouse and selected Void. Millions of dollars in scheduled expected cash flow were instantly yanked back into the heavily guarded core holding accounts of the trust. The total lockdown was complete. The financial arteries that kept my toxic family alive had been completely and surgically severed. I leaned back in my wooden dining chair and looked at the master dashboard. A sea of bright red warning labels covered the entire monitor. Every single account, subaccount, and credit line linked to Sylvia Howard and Courtney read frozen, disabled, or under federal investigation. The fortress was locked. The drawbridge was pulled up. I held the absolute only key, and I had no intention of ever letting them back inside. I glanced at the digital clock in the bottom right corner of my screen. It was 8:30 in the evening. I knew exactly where my family was right now. They had a long-standing, unbreakable tradition of celebrating major family milestones at a highly exclusive, ridiculously expensive French bistro downtown. Tonight was the eve of their grand closing on the luxury compound. They were undoubtedly sitting at the best table in the main dining room, surrounded by crystal glasses and heavy silver cutlery. I could picture the scene with perfect cinematic clarity. Sylvia was wearing a new silk dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, holding a crystal flute filled with $300 champagne. She was probably laughing loudly, making sure to project her voice so her society friends at the neighboring tables could hear all about the gorgeous new guest wing they had secured for Courtney and Jared. Howard was likely swirling a glass of aged bourbon, bragging to the sommelier about the $2.5 million real estate deal he was closing tomorrow morning, acting like a titan of industry. Courtney and her slick fiancé were sitting close together, snapping perfectly posed selfies for her social media followers, showcasing their incredible wealthy lifestyle to the internet. They were toasting to their brilliant future. They were actively celebrating the fact that they had successfully discarded me. They thought they had secured their dream house using my life savings, and they firmly believed their bottomless well of trust fund cash would continue to flow forever without interruption. They were completely oblivious to the digital massacre that had just occurred in my quiet, dusty apartment. They were drinking champagne, totally unaware that the plastic cards sitting in their designer wallets were currently dead. They did not know that when the waiter brought them the massive bill for their celebratory feast in about an hour, every single card they handed over would be humiliatingly declined in front of the entire restaurant. They did not know that the massive estate they were toasting to was already gone. They did not know that they were effectively bankrupt, practically homeless, and about to be placed under investigation for fraud. A deep, profound sense of peace settled over my entire body. The anxiety that had plagued me for a decade, the constant suffocating fear of my mother's disapproval, simply evaporated into the cool night air. The heavy burden of keeping their secrets and managing their chaos was finally lifted. I reached out and gently closed the lid of my laptop. The screen went dark, plunging the room into quiet shadows. I stood up feeling lighter than I had in years. The trap was meticulously set, the locks were fully engaged, and the countdown to their destruction had officially begun. I just had to make one phone call to secure my own safety before the bombs started going off tomorrow morning. I picked up my phone from the kitchen counter. The screen was entirely clear of notifications, a brief and beautiful silence before the storm. I bypassed my recent contacts and scrolled down to the letter H. Harrison Vance. He was the senior managing partner at my forensic accounting firm. More importantly, he was the mentor who had painstakingly taught me how to dismantle financial criminals. He was a man who possessed the kind of ruthless, razor-sharp intellect that made Wall Street executives sweat through their expensive suits. For the last 10 years, he had also been the closest thing I had to a real father. Harrison had watched me navigate the suffocating demands of my family since I was a junior analyst. He was a veteran of the financial battlefields, a man who could spot a fraudulent offshore shell company from 3 continents away. He had built his firm on the principles of absolute integrity and merciless accountability. Years ago, when my father Howard had pompously stormed into the firm lobby to demand I spend my working hours doing his personal taxes instead of billable client work, Harrison had personally escorted him out. Harrison had looked my father up and down, told him his daughter was a brilliant auditor, not a personal secretary, and banned Howard from the premises. That was the day I realized what actual respect looked like. The phone rang twice before he answered. His voice was a low, steady baritone that instantly grounded me. Fiona, it is a Tuesday night. You are supposed to be packing your entire life into boxes for that disastrous move tomorrow morning. Please tell me you are calling to say you finally backed out. I leaned against the cool granite of my kitchen island. I backed out, Harrison. I pulled the $500,000 down payment from the escrow account. The house closing is officially dead. A heavy, stunned silence fell over the line. For a man who made his living anticipating corporate disasters, I had managed to genuinely shock him. You pulled the escrow, he repeated slowly, letting the magnitude of the action sink in. Fiona, Sylvia, and Howard are going to absolutely lose their minds. The sellers are going to walk. The real estate agents are going to panic. Your parents surrender their old house keys today. They are going to be sitting on the street tomorrow. I know. I kept my voice perfectly level, but I did not just stop the house deal. I went into the Beatrice Trust. I heard the subtle shift in the background noise on his end. I knew he was sitting in his home office, likely reviewing case files. I heard the distinct sound of a heavy leather chair creaking as he sat up perfectly straight. You went into the trust, he said, his tone instantly shifting from a supportive mentor to a wartime strategist. What did you find? Everything. I took a deep breath, letting the facts flow out of me with cold, clinical precision. I ran a full forensic audit on their sub-accounts. Sylvia has been siphoning money through Courtney's fake business account to buy high-fashion and luxury sports cars. Howard has been forging medical documents to write off a $60,000 annual country club membership as rehabilitative therapy. The total embezzlement sits at $400,000. I compiled a 50-page audit report with every cleared check and wire transfer. Harrison let out a low, sharp whistle. $400,000 in documented estate fraud. They did not just cross a line, Fiona. They sprinted past it into federal territory. I know, so I locked the vault. I initiated a level 4 fraud lockdown. I disabled every secondary credit card. I canceled the monthly disbursements. They are completely cut off. Harrison started to laugh. It was a rich, booming sound of pure, unadulterated professional pride. My brilliant, quiet prodigy finally took the gloves off. You completely severed their supply line. I did. But Harrison, they are going to come for me tomorrow. The second that closing fails, the second their cards decline, they are going to unleash hell. They will show up at my apartment. They will try to storm the firm. They will threaten me with every empty legal threat they can muster. I need to know if the firm has my back. Fiona listened to me very carefully. The amusement vanished from his voice, replaced by an ironclad protective authority. You are the best forensic accountant in my entire firm. You are also the legally appointed sole executor of the Beatrice Trust. Our legal department works for you. First thing tomorrow morning, I am putting our top 3 litigation sharks on retainer for your personal protection. I am having them draft a formal notice of fiduciary breach against your parents tonight. If your parents even look at you the wrong way, we will hit them with cease and desist orders, emergency injunctions, and a formal notification to the IRS regarding their embezzlement. They will not get within 50 feet of you. A wave of profound relief washed over me. I had been carrying the weight of my family's financial sins for so long that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand in my corner. Thank you, Harrison. Do not thank me yet. We have a logistical problem to solve right now. He paused, and I could hear him pacing his office. You cannot stay in that apartment tonight. When the housing deal collapses tomorrow at 9, they are going to drive straight to your building. They will pound on your door. They will make a scene in the hallway. I will not have you sitting there waiting to be ambushed by those parasites. I looked around at my neatly packed cardboard boxes. I have nowhere else to go tonight. My lease officially ends in 2 days. Yes, you do. You are coming to my house right now. I have the guest house on the back of my property. It is fully furnished. The fridge is stocked, and most importantly, it sits behind a 12-foot iron gate with a dedicated security team. You pack whatever you absolutely need to survive the next week, you get in your car, and you drive here. You will not face this storm alone. I felt a hard lump form in my throat. For my entire life, my biological parents had treated me like a disposable utility offering shelter only when it benefited their financial schemes. Now a man who shared zero DNA with me was offering me a fortress simply because he valued my safety and my dignity. Harrison, I cannot impose on you like that. You have done enough by securing the legal team. It is not an imposition, Fiona. It is a strategic relocation. You need a secure command center to watch their house of cards collapse tomorrow. Do not argue with me on this. Pack a bag and text me when you are on the road. I will leave the gate code active for you. I agreed. I ended the call and stood in the center of my apartment. The silence was absolute. I looked at the dozens of heavy cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. They contained dishes, books, winter coats, and framed photographs. They represented the heavy, burdensome life I had lived while chained to my family's expectations. I had spent 3 weeks packing them, preparing to move my entire existence into their shiny new compound to continue serving as their loyal accountant. I looked at a specific box labeled living room decor. Sitting right on top was an expensive, gaudy crystal vase Sylvia had given me for my 30th birthday. She had handed it to me with a passive-aggressive smirk, noting that since I was clearly never going to get married and have a registry, I should start collecting nice things to fill my empty home. I walked over to the box, picked up the heavy crystal vase, and dropped it straight into the kitchen trash can. It shattered with a satisfying, sharp crack. I was not taking her insults with me into my new life. I walked into my bedroom and grabbed a single sturdy duffel bag from the closet. I did not need the boxes. I did not need the heavy baggage of the past. I opened my dresser and rapidly packed 5 days' worth of sharp professional business suits. I packed my daily essentials, my makeup, and my favorite pair of running shoes. I walked into my home office and carefully placed my laptop, the hard drive containing the Beatrice audit, and all my critical physical documents into my leather briefcase. I walked back into the living room and stopped at the kitchen counter. I picked up the keys to my apartment and the shiny new set of keys my mother had given me for the luxury compound just last week. I stared at the compound keys. They were heavy brass and entirely symbolic of a cage I was no longer willing to enter. I tossed them into the trash can, letting them fall right on top of the shattered crystal. I shouldered my duffel bag and gripped my briefcase tightly. I did not look back. I walked out of my apartment, pulled the door shut, and locked the deadbolt for the final time. The hallway was quiet as I made my way to the elevator. My footsteps echoed softly, marking the rhythm of my departure. When I reached the underground parking garage, the cool, damp air felt refreshing. I opened the trunk of my car and tossed my bags inside. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and let the low rumble of the motor fill the concrete space. As I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the dark city streets, I felt an incredible sense of liberation. The city lights blurred past my windows, a glowing path leading me away from decades of emotional abuse and financial exploitation. I was leaving behind the toxic, demanding shadows of Sylvia, Howard, and Courtney. I was leaving behind the girl who always swallowed her pride to keep the peace. I navigated through the empty nighttime streets, the glow of the streetlights washing over my dashboard. I thought about my family currently sitting in their favorite upscale French bistro, ordering imported wine and toasting to their incredible real estate victory. They were probably laughing at my expense, mocking the fact that I had been exiled to figure out my own housing at the 11th hour. They had no idea that while they were clinking their expensive glasses, the ground beneath their feet had completely vanished. I rolled down my window, letting the crisp, cool night air rush into the car. The suffocating anxiety that had sat on my chest for my entire adult life was gone. I drove toward the wealthy gated hills on the outskirts of the city, heading toward Harrison's property. I felt safe. I felt powerful. I had secured my alliance with a mentor who actually respected me, and I had armed myself with a legal team capable of destroying my family's fraudulent empire. I gripped the steering wheel, a small, genuine smile playing across my lips. The trap was perfectly set. The escape was complete. I was entirely ready for tomorrow morning, ready to watch the sun rise, and ready to watch their entire world burn to the ground. The morning sun streamed through the sheer linen curtains of Harrison's guest house, painting long, golden strips across the hardwood floor. I woke up naturally without the harsh blare of an alarm clock, and without the suffocating knot of anxiety that usually sat heavy on my chest. For a moment, I just lay there in the oversized king bed staring up at the vaulted ceiling. The air was perfectly still. There was no sound of Sylvia shrieking from down the hall about a misplaced pair of designer shoes. There was no Howard bellowing for someone to bring him his morning newspaper. There was only the gentle rustle of wind through the ancient oak trees outside the window. I threw off the heavy duvet and walked into the pristine modern kitchen. Harrison had not exaggerated when he said the place was fully stocked. I found bags of premium roasted coffee beans, a high-end espresso machine, and fresh cream in the stainless steel refrigerator. I took my time measuring the beans, listening to the satisfying grind of the machine and inhaling the rich, dark aroma. I poured the steaming coffee into a heavy ceramic mug, savoring the heat against my palms. I walked over to the kitchen island and sat on a plush leather bar stool. I had left my phone charging face down on the counter overnight. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the caffeine hit my bloodstream before I finally reached out and flipped the device over. The screen illuminated instantly, flooded with a chaotic wall of bright red notifications. I stared at the lock screen, doing the quick mental math that my brain always defaulted to. There were exactly 50 missed calls. There were 37 unread text messages. There were 14 new voicemails. The notifications were a digital stampede, a visual representation of a family completely losing their grip on reality. I unlocked the phone and opened my visual voicemail app. The timeline of the messages told a perfect chronological story of escalating panic. The first message had been left at 7:15 in the morning. I tapped the play icon, leaning back in my chair to listen. Sylvia's voice filled the quiet kitchen. She sounded brisk, authoritative, and mildly irritated. "Fiona, where are you? The movers are already here loading the last of the heavy furniture. You were supposed to be here an hour ago to oversee the kitchen boxes. Do not tell me you are pouting because of our conversation yesterday. Grow up and get over here immediately. We have to be at the attorney's office in an hour for the closing. Call me back right now." I smiled into my coffee mug. She still thought she held all the cards. She still believed my absence was just a petty, childish tantrum. The second voicemail was logged at 8:10. Sylvia sounded significantly more stressed, her breathing shallow and quick. "Fiona, this is no longer funny. Your father is furious. We are sitting in the lobby of the real estate office, and the escrow agent is not answering her direct line. I need you to call the bank and make sure they did not flag the wire transfer for a security hold. You know how incompetent those bankers can be. Fix this right now. Courtney is getting anxious and Jared is pacing the room. Call me back the second you get this message." The third voicemail arrived at 8:30. This time it was my father. Howard's voice was a low, threatening rumble, the tone he used when he wanted to intimidate someone into submission. "Fiona, pick up your phone. The title company is acting like a group of complete amateurs. They are claiming they cannot verify the primary down payment. I told them you processed the wire yesterday afternoon. I am not going to sit here and look like a fool in front of the sellers because you made an administrative error. Get the corporate lawyers on the line right now and tell them to authorize the release of the funds. Do not make me come find you." I took another sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. Howard still thought the corporate lawyers controlled the Beatrice Trust. He actually believed he could bully them into fixing a problem that I had deliberately created. He had no idea that those lawyers were currently drafting a brutal cease and desist order under my direct instructions. By 8:45, the messages shifted from angry demands to frantic confusion. Sylvia left 3 voicemails back to back. The background noise in the recordings was chaotic. I could hear papers shuffling, people arguing, and the distinct sound of someone crying. "Fiona, what is happening?" Sylvia shrieked in the 5th voicemail, completely abandoning her polished country club persona. "The escrow agent just walked into the room and told us the $500,000 is gone. She said the primary funder initiated a complete withdrawal of the capital. What does that mean? Where did the money go? You need to fix this right now. The moving trucks are sitting in the driveway of the old house. They are fully packed and idling. Do you have any idea how much they charge by the hour? We are bleeding cash while we sit here waiting for you to correct this ridiculous banking error. Call me. I swiped down to the next message logged at 9:15. The closing time had officially passed. The deadline had come and gone. The bomb had detonated. It was Courtney, my golden child sister, the lifestyle influencer who had gleefully planned to take over my promised guest suite, was absolutely sobbing into the phone. Her voice was a high, panicked wail completely devoid of her usual smug entitlement. "Fiona, please, pick up." Courtney gasped, struggling to catch her breath between loud sobs. "Please tell me this is a joke. Please tell me you did not do this." The real estate agent just walked out of the room. She refused to hand over the keys to the new compound. She told Mom and Dad that the deal is dead. The title company officially informed everyone that you backed out of the funding. The loan has completely collapsed. The bank pulled the mortgage. We do not have the house, Fiona. We do not have the house. Courtney paused to let out a loud, dramatic wail. I could hear Jared in the background, his voice tight with anger, asking what the hell was going on with her family. Jared is freaking out. Courtney cried into the receiver. He thought we were moving into the luxury suite today. He already ordered custom furniture to be delivered to the new address. Mom is screaming at the title agent, and Dad is threatening to sue everyone in the building. Fiona, where are the keys? Where is the money? We already gave the old house keys to the buyers. We have nowhere to go. The moving trucks are charging us $1,000 an hour just to sit in the driveway. Please call us back. Please fix this. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I set my phone down on the smooth granite counter. I sat in the beautiful sunlit kitchen of Harrison's guest house and listened to the profound, unbroken silence around me. There was no screaming. There was no chaos. There was just the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the warm sunlight streaming through the windows. For my entire life, I had been trained to react to my family's panic. Whenever Sylvia raised her voice, my heart rate would spike and I would scramble to solve whatever crisis she had created. Whenever Howard made a threat, I would instantly calculate the fastest way to appease him. Whenever Courtney cried, I was expected to sacrifice my own comfort to dry her tears. My nervous system had been hijacked by their endless demands, conditioned to leap into action the moment their manufactured emergencies began. But right now, listening to the absolute destruction of their unearned, entitled reality, my heart rate did not rise a single beat. My hands were perfectly steady. My breathing was slow and deep. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. They had told me they were moving on without me. They had smugly declared that they did not have space for me in their beautiful new life. They had discarded me with a single voicemail, fully expecting me to roll over and accept my punishment. Now they were standing in a sterile real estate office, completely humiliated in front of the sellers, the brokers, and the bank. They were trapped between a house they no longer owned and a luxury compound they could no longer afford. They were bleeding cash by the hour as moving trucks sat idling in a driveway that no longer belonged to them. They were staring down the barrel of total, catastrophic ruin. And this was just the result of my first strike. This was just the consequence of me pulling my own personal money out of the equation. They had not even reached the second phase of the nightmare yet. They were so consumed by the loss of the real estate deal that they had not even attempted to use their debit cards yet. They had not yet realized that their emergency safety net was entirely gone. They had not yet discovered that the Beatrice Trust, their endless fountain of stolen wealth, had been locked down tighter than a federal vault. I picked up my phone again. I did not text them back. I did not call them. I simply swiped the notification screen away and opened my email. I had an unread message from Harrison's legal team. It contained a draft of the fiduciary breach notification, ready to be formally served to Sylvia and Howard. I read through the dense, aggressive legal language, admiring the sheer brutality of the wording. The lawyers had outlined the $400,000 in embezzled funds with razor-sharp precision. I typed a quick reply approving the draft and authorizing them to prepare for immediate deployment. I set the phone down and finished my coffee. The morning was still young. My family was currently running through the 5 stages of grief in a downtown office building, desperately trying to comprehend how their perfect plan had turned into a nightmare. They would soon shift from panic to rage. They would start hunting for me. They would try to force me to surrender. But I was not the victim anymore. I was the architect of their downfall, and I was more than ready for whatever they tried to throw at me next. I stood up from the kitchen island, taking my empty coffee mug to the stainless steel sink. The warm water cascaded over the smooth ceramic, washing away the bitter, dark dregs. Just as I set the mug on the drying rack and wiped my hands on a crisp linen towel, the screen of my phone lit up again, buzzing aggressively against the granite countertop. The second wave had officially breached the shore. It was 10:45 in the morning. The initial staggering shock of the collapsed real estate deal had clearly worn off, forcing my family out of their denial and directly into crisis management mode. When a $2.5 million luxury compound falls through on the day of closing, you do not just walk away empty-handed. You still have 2 massive commercial moving trucks loaded with 50 years of hoarded designer furniture, antique Persian rugs, and heavy crystal chandeliers. You have to put those wildly expensive items somewhere. I tapped the visual voicemail application on my screen, bypassing the numerous text messages, and selected the newest audio recording from my mother. Sylvia did not start the message with her usual commanding aristocratic tone. Her voice was thin, sharp, and laced with an absolute unadulterated panic that I had never heard from her before. The background noise captured by her phone microphone was highly telling and incredibly chaotic. I could hear the heavy diesel rumble of the commercial moving trucks idling loudly. Intercut with the engine noise was the gruff, impatient voice of the moving company foreman giving sharp orders to his crew. Sylvia explained rapidly that she had directed the moving fleet back to the driveway of their old house while they desperately tried to figure out a temporary storage solution. The moving company, however, required an immediate security deposit of $10,000 to transport the massive estate into their emergency climate-controlled storage vaults. Sylvia recounted how she had proudly produced her heavy custom metal platinum trust card, standing on the sidewalk in her designer closing outfit. She had handed the card to the foreman with her usual haughty demeanor, expecting the magic piece of plastic to instantly solve her logistical nightmare. The portable card reader had beeped. Declined. Sylvia practically hyperventilated into the phone receiver as she described what happened next. She had angrily told the foreman to run it again, blaming the magnetic strip and threatening to report his machine as defective. He ran it a second time. Declined. The machine prompted the merchant to retain the card and contact the issuer. Sylvia described the sheer, paralyzing humiliation of standing on the suburban sidewalk while the moving foreman and his entire crew looked at her with pure, unmasked pity. She demanded, her voice cracking with hysteria, that I call the corporate lawyers this very second to lift what she assumed was a temporary automated security hold on the trust account. She actually thought the bank had flagged the large unexpected storage fee for fraud protection. She had absolutely no idea that the entire account was a dead, frozen wasteland permanently deactivated by my own hand. I deleted the message with a slow, deliberate swipe of my thumb and moved to the next notification. It was my father. Howard rarely left voicemails. He considered speaking to an answering machine to be entirely beneath him, a task meant for secretaries and subordinates. The fact that he was leaving one now meant his massive, fragile ego had sustained a critical direct hit. He was not calling from the lobby of the real estate office. The ambient noise featured cars driving by at high speeds and the distinct mechanical chime of a retail gas station pump. Howard was livid. His voice shook with a dangerous, aggressive rage that used to make me cower in my childhood bedroom. He had stormed away from the failed closing in a furious huff, gotten into his luxury imported sedan, and realized he needed fuel to drive across town to yell at his attorneys. He had confidently swiped his exclusive black card at the generic pump. The digital screen flashed a harsh red message telling him to see the cashier inside. Howard recounted how he walked into the convenience store, fully expecting to berate a minimum-wage teenager over a machine malfunction. Instead, the cashier casually informed him that the credit card network had returned a strict code for suspected fraud and that the account was completely locked. Howard roared into his phone, threatening to have me fired from my accounting firm by the end of the day. He threatened to sue the bank, the title company, and the federal government. He ordered me to wire him funds from my personal savings account immediately so he could fill his gas tank and drive to the law office to fix this unprecedented outrage. He sounded completely unhinged. The powerful titan of industry, the man who regularly spent $60,000 on fraudulent country club memberships, was currently stranded at a local gas station entirely unable to purchase $50 worth of premium fuel. I tapped delete on Howard's rant and skipped to the third message. It was Courtney. If Sylvia was panicked and Howard was enraged, my younger sister was experiencing a total catastrophic psychological meltdown. The sound of her weeping was so loud and piercing that I had to physically turn the volume down on my device just to understand her words. Courtney had not stayed with our parents to manage the idling moving trucks or face the confused real estate agents. She had fled the disastrous closing and driven straight to the pristine white marble office of her luxury wedding planner to seek comfort and finalize the floral arrangements for her upcoming lavish reception. The wedding planner, maintaining a tight professional smile, had politely requested the next scheduled installment payment of $20,000 before proceeding with the European flower orders. Courtney had cheerfully pulled out her corporate expense card, the one tied directly to her fake organic skincare business, fully expecting the Beatrice Trust to foot the bill as usual. The planner ran the card. The transaction failed immediately. Courtney sobbed into the voicemail that she had confidently logged into her mobile banking application right there in the bridal studio to transfer the funds manually, assuming it was a simple daily limit issue. Instead, she saw the bright red warning banners spanning across her entire financial dashboard. Her checking account was frozen solid. Her corporate credit lines were disabled. The scheduled transfer of $5,000 from my parents' main account had completely vanished from the pending ledger. Courtney screamed into the phone that her wedding planner was now threatening to release the venue reservation by the end of the business day. Jared, the slick social climber she was supposed to marry, had witnessed the card decline and was now mysteriously refusing to answer her text messages. Her perfect, highly curated influencer life had just evaporated into thin air in the middle of a bridal salon. She begged me to fix the accounts, crying so hard she was choking on her own words, promising that she would convince our parents to let me have my old bedroom back if I just turned the money back on right now. I set the phone down on the granite counter, a profound, warming wave of absolute satisfaction settling deep into my bones. The timeline of their destruction was unfolding flawlessly, exceeding even my own meticulous projections. I closed my eyes and visualized their exact physical reality at this precise moment. I pieced together the geographical and financial nightmare they were currently trapped in. Sylvia and Howard were sitting in the leather seats of their luxury vehicles in the driveway of their former home. They no longer owned the property, having formally surrendered the keys and the deed yesterday afternoon. The new owners could arrive to take possession at any minute, expecting an empty house. The commercial moving trucks were parked on the street, blocking the suburban traffic with the meters running at astronomical hourly rates. The moving drivers were leaning against their cabs, refusing to turn off the engines or unload a single box until they received a cleared, verified payment. My parents could not pay them. They could not pay for the emergency storage vaults. They could not pay for a temporary luxury hotel room. Howard could not even pay for the gasoline required to drive his expensive sedan away from the scene of their ultimate humiliation. They were entirely, utterly broke. The glittering, untouchable illusion of their massive wealth had been violently stripped away, leaving them stranded on a suburban sidewalk with their packed cardboard boxes and their shattered egos. They had absolutely zero access to capital. The golden well of the Beatrice Trust was permanently dry. They were completely paralyzed, trapped in a driveway, with nowhere to go and no money to get there. And I was the only person on Earth who knew exactly why the lights had gone out and why they were never, ever turning back on. My phone vibrated against the granite countertop, but this time it was not a desperate phone call from my mother or a furious voicemail from my father. It was a crisp, solitary text message. I glanced at the screen and recognized the contact name immediately. It was Richard Caldwell, the highly expensive, highly arrogant real estate attorney my parents had retained for the luxury compound closing. Richard was a man who billed $1,000 an hour and had spent the last 3 months treating me like an incompetent intern. During our mandatory conference calls, he would constantly talk over me, demand that I fetch financial records faster, and speak to me with a condescending tone that implied I was barely qualified to operate a calculator. He firmly believed my parents were the true titans of wealth, and that I was just the unfortunate, plain daughter tasked with managing their paperwork. I picked up the phone. Richard had never texted me directly before. He considered texting to be unprofessional and far beneath his prestigious status. He always preferred to have his paralegals email me with demanding lists of financial deliverables. The fact that he was texting my personal cell phone right now meant that the polished, bulletproof world he operated in had just violently shattered. I opened the message. It was short, frantic, and completely devoid of his usual legal arrogance. "We have a serious problem. The bank is alleging massive fraud on the trust accounts. Call me immediately." I leaned back against the kitchen island and let out a soft, genuine laugh. I lifted my ceramic mug and took a long, slow sip of the premium dark roast coffee Harrison had provided. The hot liquid warmed my throat, contrasting perfectly with the icy satisfaction spreading through my chest. Richard Caldwell was currently sitting in his mahogany conference room, staring at a frozen escrow portal and a canceled mortgage application. The lending bank had undoubtedly sent him the automated federal fraud alerts triggered by my lockdown of the Beatrice Trust. He was expecting me to panic. He was expecting me to cry and beg for his high-priced legal assistance to navigate the sudden disaster. He assumed I was just as terrified and confused as my parents were. I set my coffee mug down on the counter. I tapped the screen and typed my response with deliberate, steady keystrokes. "I know." I filed the report. I hit send. I did not elaborate. I did not offer any further explanation. I simply dropped that devastating grenade into his lap and locked my phone screen. I could easily picture Richard staring at those 6 words in absolute horror. In a matter of seconds, he would realize that the quiet, submissive accountant he had been belittling for months was actually the architect of his client's total financial destruction. He would realize that my parents were not wealthy socialites facing a banking error. They were active targets of a major fraud investigation, and they currently owed his law firm thousands of dollars in billable hours that they could no longer pay. I walked out of the kitchen and headed toward the master bathroom of the guest house. The morning was progressing exactly according to my timeline. The initial shock had passed, and the desperation phase was rapidly escalating. My family was stranded in their driveway with the moving trucks, and their attorney had just confirmed that their money was not just missing, but legally frozen under allegations of federal fraud. They would instantly realize that they could not bully their way out of this situation over the phone. They needed to find me. They needed to corner me and force me to reverse whatever digital damage I had done. They did not know my current address. I had successfully moved out of my old apartment, and they had absolutely no idea that I was staying on a secure property owned by the senior partner of my accounting firm. But my family was nothing if not predictable. Sylvia and Howard would assume I had gone to my office. They would drive downtown March into the lobby of my firm and demand to see me. I had already anticipated this exact maneuver. Last night, Harrison and I had formulated a precise countermeasure. Harrison had instructed his front desk receptionist to intercept my parents. She was trained to act slightly flustered and conveniently leak the information that I was out of the building, currently attending a critical business lunch with Harrison at a very specific, highly visible upscale bistro in the financial district. I stepped into the glass-enclosed shower and let the hot water wash over me. I was no longer the exhausted, compliant daughter packing cardboard boxes to serve their whims. I was stepping into the most powerful role of my life. I turned off the water, dried off, and walked into the spacious walk-in closet to retrieve the single duffel bag I had brought with me. I did not dress casually. I bypassed the comfortable sweaters and jeans. I reached for the sharpest, most intimidating professional suit I owned. It was a tailored charcoal gray suit with a crisp white silk blouse and a structured blazer. I slipped into a pair of sleek black leather heels. I pinned my hair back into a severe, flawless twist. I applied my makeup with military precision, focusing on sharp, defined lines. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the transformation was complete. The woman staring back at me did not look like a frightened scapegoat. She looked like a heavily armed corporate executive. She looked exactly like the sole executor of a multi-million-dollar estate. I grabbed my leather briefcase containing the physical copy of the forensic audit report and walked out the door. The drive to the financial district was smooth. The mid-morning traffic had cleared and the city streets felt open and bright. I handed my car keys to the valet outside the restaurant and walked through the heavy glass doors. The bistro was a renowned establishment favored by investment bankers and corporate litigators. The atmosphere was loud and energetic, filled with the clinking of crystal glasses and the low, confident hum of high-stakes business conversations. The lighting was warm, and the tables were positioned closely together, creating an environment where privacy was impossible. It was the perfect stage for a public reckoning. The hostess recognized Harrison's name immediately and escorted me to a prime booth situated directly in the center of the main dining room. Harrison was already there wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit and sipping a glass of sparkling water. He smiled as I approached the table and took my seat across from him. "You look like you are ready to dismantle a major corporation." Harrison noted, his eyes gleaming with professional pride. I placed my leather briefcase on the empty seat beside me. "I am ready to dismantle the illusion," I replied. "Did your receptionist deliver the location?" Harrison checked his gold wristwatch. "She called me 5 minutes ago. Your parents stormed the lobby exactly as you predicted. Howard threatened to have her fired and Sylvia demanded access to your office." The receptionist played her part flawlessly. She pretended to be intimidated and blurted out that we were having an urgent lunch meeting at this exact restaurant. "Your family rushed back out to their car. They should be arriving any minute now." I picked up the menu, scanning the options with complete serenity. The trap was fully set and the prey was currently racing across town to step right into it. I ordered a light salad and a glass of iced tea. I felt no anxiety. I felt no fear of the impending confrontation. I sat in the bustling, affluent restaurant and waited for the collision. It happened 20 minutes later. The heavy glass doors at the front of the bistro swung open with violent force. The elegant, sophisticated atmosphere of the restaurant was immediately disrupted by the frantic, chaotic entrance of my family. Sylvia Howard Courtney and her fiancé Jared pushed past the stunned hostess and stormed directly into the main dining room. The visual contrast between us was staggering. I sat in my pristine charcoal suit, calmly sipping iced tea in the center of the room. My family looked like they had just survived a natural disaster. Howard was sweating profusely, his expensive dress shirt wrinkled, and his tie hanging loosely around his neck. Courtney's carefully curated makeup was completely smeared down her cheeks from hours of hysterical crying. Jared looked panicked and deeply uncomfortable, glancing around at the wealthy patrons as if realizing he was suddenly associated with a group of deranged people. But Sylvia was the main event. My mother looked entirely unhinged. Her designer hair was messy and her face was flushed with a vibrant, ugly red anger. She scanned the dining room, her eyes locking onto my table. She did not walk toward me. She marched. Sylvia reached our booth and slammed both of her hands flat onto the polished wood of the table, rattling the silverware. She deliberately pitched her voice loud enough to carry across the restaurant, instinctively utilizing her oldest manipulation tactic. She wanted to play the desperate, victimized mother in front of an audience, hoping the public pressure would shame me into submission. "How could you make a banking error on closing day?" Sylvia shrieked, ensuring that the investment bankers at the adjacent tables turned their heads to watch the drama unfold. "Your sister is homeless and in tears. The moving trucks are sitting in the street costing us thousands. We have been trying to reach you all morning. Fix the accounts right now so we can move." Howard crowded in right behind her, his face twisted in a furious scowl. "You embarrassed us in front of the entire real estate firm," Howard barked, his deep voice carrying over the ambient noise of the bistro. "The corporate lawyers are refusing to release the funds. Get on your phone this instant and authorize the transfer before I drag you back to the office myself. Courtney began to sob loudly, performing for the crowd. Jared stood slightly behind her, shifting his weight nervously and looking at me with a mixture of confusion and anger. The restaurant patrons had completely stopped their business discussions. Dozens of eyes were locked onto our table, watching the chaotic family meltdown, interrupting their expensive lunches. Sylvia expected me to shrink away. She expected me to lower my head, apologize profusely, and desperately try to hush her to avoid the public humiliation. She thought the social pressure would break me just as it always had when I was a child. I did not shrink away. I did not lower my voice. I did not break eye contact. I calmly placed my linen napkin on the table. I leaned back against the leather booth, projecting an aura of total unshakable authority. I looked up at the four frantic, sweating people towering over my table. "Sit down," I said. My voice was not loud, but it possessed a sharp cutting edge that sliced right through their hysteria. I gestured casually to the empty chairs surrounding the adjacent table, indicating that they needed to pull them over and take a seat. Sylvia blinked, completely thrown off balance by my lack of panic. "I am not sitting down until you fix the bank accounts," she hissed. I maintained my direct, unwavering eye contact. I reached down into my briefcase and pulled out the heavy spiral-bound document. I placed it squarely in the center of the dining table. The thick stack of paper landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. "You are going to want to sit down for this, Sylvia," I said smoothly, ensuring my voice carried clearly to the surrounding tables. "Because the banking system is working perfectly. I am preparing to show you exactly why your money is gone, and I am going to do it right here in front of everyone." I rested my hands on top of the forensic audit report. The final phase of my strategy was ready to detonate. I sat in the center of the crowded bistro, surrounded by an audience of silent, watching patrons, and prepared to dismantle my family's entire existence. Sylvia stared at the thick binder on the table, her chest heaving with exertion and fury. For a fraction of a second, her ingrained obedience to social decorum battled against her absolute outrage. The restaurant was entirely too quiet now. The clinking of silverware had ceased. Investment bankers and corporate litigators at the adjacent tables were openly watching our booth. Howard grabbed a chair from the next table, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the tile floor, and forced himself into it. Sylvia and Courtney followed suit, perching on the edge of the leather seats, as if they were made of hot coals. Jared remained standing behind Courtney, shifting his weight uneasily, his eyes darting between my calm demeanor and the heavy document resting under my fingertips. I did not offer them menus. I did not offer them water. I simply tapped the cover of the binder. "It was not an error, Sylvia," I said, my voice projecting with chilling professional clarity. Every word was deliberately articulated. I pulled my $500,000 down payment, and I froze the trust. The air vanished from the table. Sylvia blinked rapidly, her mouth forming a silent, stunned circle. Howard leaned forward, his face a mask of purple rage. "You did what," Howard growled, his voice a dangerous, low rumble. "You have no authority to touch the trust accounts, Fiona. You are an accountant. You just file the paperwork. Turn the money back on right now before I have you arrested for financial tampering." I smiled. It was a cold, razor-sharp smile that I had perfected after years of watching Harrison dismantle hostile witnesses. I opened the thick, spiral-bound forensic audit report to the very first tab. I smoothed the page flat. "I am not tampering, Howard," I replied smoothly. "I am auditing. And what I found is going to put both of you in federal prison if you do not sit down, shut up, and listen to exactly how your reality has changed." I turned my gaze to my younger sister. Courtney was no longer crying. Her tears had dried up, replaced by a look of profound, dawning terror. She looked at Jared, then back to the binder. "Let us start with Courtney's brilliant entrepreneurial venture," I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the neighboring booths. 3 years ago, you requested a massive capital injection from the trust to fund a high-end organic skincare line. I processed the seed money. I set up the automated monthly transfers. But yesterday I ran a full forensic trace on the vendor routing numbers. I flipped a page. I slid a high-resolution printout of a bank transfer across the table. It landed right in front of Jared. "There is no skincare line, Courtney," I stated flatly. "The vendor names on your outgoing wire transfers are not chemical manufacturers. They are luxury European car dealerships and high fashion houses in Paris and Milan. You claimed $40,000 for product testing and chemical analysis. The routing number matches a boutique luxury auto broker in Miami. You used your fake business account to buy a brand new sports car." Courtney gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Jared leaned over, staring at the bank document with widening eyes. His jaw tightened. He was a social climber looking for a wealthy bride, and he was currently looking at irrefutable proof that his future wife was a broke fraudster. Sylvia slammed her hand on the table. "That is a lie. You fabricated these documents. Those were legitimate marketing expenses. We were building her brand. You claimed $75,000 over 2 years for promotional photo shoots and brand ambassador wardrobes," I countered, flipping to the next exhibit. "The money went directly to designer boutiques. You bought yourself a closet full of haute couture custom handbags and diamond jewelry. You illegally coded the purchases as necessary business overhead for a limited liability company that produces absolutely zero revenue. You used a dead woman's legacy to fund your shallow vanity. You stole $180,000, Sylvia." Sylvia looked like she might actually vomit. Her eyes darted wildly around the restaurant, suddenly painfully aware of the affluent audience watching her public execution. The women at the table next to us were literally pausing with their forks halfway to their mouths, absorbing every single detail of Sylvia's high-fashion embezzlement. I did not give them a second to recover. I turned the page of the binder and locked eyes with my father. Howard was sweating profusely now. The commanding titan of industry was melting under the harsh fluorescent light of accountability. "Now let us discuss your medical expenses, Howard," I said, my tone shifting to pure ice. Grandma Beatrice mandated that any genuine medical emergency or necessary therapeutic care for her children would be fully covered by the trust. For the last 3 fiscal years, you have claimed $60,000 annually for rehabilitative physical therapy and mobility assistance. Howard swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously against his tight collar. "It is for my knee. The doctor recommended water aerobics and targeted stretching." I slid a massive stack of cleared checks across the polished wood. I traced those outgoing checks through the banking clearinghouse system. The destination was not a hospital, a specialized clinic, or a private medical practice. The funds were deposited directly into the primary operating account of the Oak Ridge Valley Country Club. A collective audible gasp echoed from a nearby table. The Oak Ridge Valley Country Club was the most exclusive golf club in the state. Several members were likely sitting in this very restaurant. "You forged medical documents from a highly compensated private doctor to classify your daily rounds of golf as required cardiovascular therapy," I declared mercilessly. "You classified your heavy bar tabs at the clubhouse as nutritional supplements. You actually wrote off the purchase of a custom leather-seated golf cart as a necessary motorized mobility aid." Howard gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked completely trapped, a man realizing the walls of his fraudulent empire were collapsing inward. "You embezzled $220,000, I stated, bringing the hammer down. "That brings the grand total to $400,000 stolen from Grandma Beatrice's estate, $400,000 in wire fraud, tax evasion, and direct violation of fiduciary duty." The silence that followed was absolute. I had systematically stripped them bare. They had stormed into this restaurant expecting to bully an obedient, quiet accountant into surrendering her life savings. Instead, they had walked into a meticulously prepared slaughter. Howard's shock suddenly mutated into a desperate, violent rage. He slammed his fist down onto the table so hard the iced tea in my glass sloshed over the rim. His face was a mask of furious, unadulterated entitlement. He could not accept that the daughter he had bullied for 3 decades was currently holding the executioner's axe. "You arrogant, ungrateful little brat!" Howard spat, his voice trembling with fury. "You think this little binder means anything? You think you can freeze my accounts and steal my house over some creative accounting? You are nothing but a paper pusher. I am calling the corporate lawyers right now. I will have the senior partners at the firm sue you for slander, defamation, and corporate espionage. They will strip you of your accounting license. They will throw you in a jail cell and throw away the key. You do not run the Beatrice Trust. You are just the help. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle. Sitting across from me, Harrison calmly reached for his crisp white linen napkin. He picked it up methodically, wiped the corners of his mouth, and set it neatly beside his plate. He adjusted his impeccably tailored navy suit jacket, leaned forward, and rested his forearms on the table. He looked at my father with the kind of predatory, effortless dominance that took decades of boardroom warfare to perfect. "Howard, is it?" Harrison asked. His baritone voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly calm. Howard glared at him. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Harrison Vance. I am the senior managing partner of the forensic accounting and legal firm that oversees the Beatrice Trust. I am the man you just threatened to call." The color instantly drained from Howard's face. Sylvia let out a small, strangled squeak. Courtney shrank back into the booth, wishing she could disappear into the leather upholstery. Harrison did not break eye contact. He delivered the final devastating blow with absolute precision. "I believe you are operating under a catastrophic misunderstanding of your family's legal hierarchy. My firm does not control the Beatrice estate. We never have. My corporate lawyers do not work for you, Howard. They work exclusively for the individual holding the master mandate." Harrison gestured gracefully toward me. "Beatrice named Fiona as the sole trustee and legal executor of her entire estate 5 years ago," Harrison informed them calmly. "My firm simply executes her orders. She approves your budget. She holds the master keys to the vault. And as of last night, she instructed my legal team to draft a formal notice of fiduciary breach against you for the theft of $400,000. You are not going to sue her, Howard. You are going to be praying she does not send this binder directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The absolute shift in power was instantaneous and total. The ground completely gave way beneath their feet. They were not facing a rebellious daughter. They were facing the absolute legally appointed master of their entire financial universe. And she had just locked the doors from the outside. The silence that engulfed our table was absolute. The ambient noise of the upscale bistro seemed to fade into a dull, distant hum as the sheer magnitude of Harrison's declaration settled over the group. Sylvia and Howard sat frozen, their faces drained of all color, staring at me as if I had suddenly transformed into a terrifying, unfamiliar creature. But my attention shifted from my parents to the man standing just behind my sister's chair. Jared. Up until this exact second, Jared had played his role flawlessly. He was the supportive, handsome fiancé, the ambitious young professional who had managed to secure a spot in a wealthy, prominent family. He always wore suits that were tailored just a fraction too tight, eager to project an image of aggressive success. Throughout our brief interactions over the past year, he had treated me with the same casual, dismissive arrogance that my parents exhibited. To Jared, I was just the dull, spinster accountant who processed the paperwork for his future empire. He had spent months bragging to his friends about the massive luxury compound he was moving into, proudly discussing the custom renovations he planned for the guest wing that my mother had stolen from me. Now I watched the complex, rapid mathematical equations firing behind his perfectly groomed exterior. Jared was not a man driven by love or loyalty. He was a social climber, a parasite who had attached himself to what he believed was an endless, overflowing fountain of generational wealth. He had hitched his wagon to the Beatrice Trust, fully expecting to ride it straight to the top of the social ladder. I watched his eyes dart from the thick, spiral-bound forensic audit report, resting on the table, to Harrison's impeccably tailored navy suit, and finally to my face. The absolute reality of the situation crashed into him like a runaway freight train. He was processing the facts with ruthless speed. Fact 1. The $2.5 million luxury compound was completely dead, the financing pulled by the very woman sitting across the table. Fact 2. The Beatrice Trust. The golden goose he thought he was marrying into was securely locked inside a digital vault that my family could not access. Fact 3. Sylvia and Howard were not wealthy benefactors preparing to fund his lavish lifestyle. They were entirely broke, currently homeless, and staring down the barrel of a devastating federal fraud investigation for embezzling $400,000. Fact 4, and perhaps the most devastating to his carefully laid plans. Courtney, his beautiful influencer fiancée, had absolutely nothing. She possessed no trust fund, no legitimate business, and no access to capital. She was a financial void. Jared physically took a half step backward, putting distance between himself and Courtney's chair. The subtle movement did not go unnoticed. Courtney, who had been shrinking under the weight of her own exposure, reached back blindly to grab his hand for comfort. She needed her charming, protective fiancé to defend her, to shout at me, or at the very least to pull her into a reassuring embrace. Jared pulled his hand away. The rejection was sharp and deliberate. Courtney snapped her head around her tear-streaked face, looking up at him in pure, unadulterated shock. "Jared," she whispered, her voice trembling with panic. "What are you doing? Tell them this is a mistake. Tell her she cannot do this to us. We need that house. We ordered the custom nursery furniture. We have the wedding deposits to pay." Jared did not look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the audit report sitting in the center of the table. His pristine, supportive facade was cracking, revealing the cold, calculating opportunist underneath. He slowly shook his head, his jaw tightening as he looked at Sylvia, then at Howard. "You do not have the house," Jared stated. His voice was completely flat, devoid of any warmth or affection. It cut through the tension at the table like a surgical scalpel. "You do not have the house, Courtney. You do not have a trust fund. You do not even have a real business. Jared, please." Courtney begged, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. "Fiona is just having a breakdown. She is just jealous of us. My parents will fix this. The lawyers will fix this." "There are no lawyers coming to save you," Jared snapped, finally looking down at her. His tone was dripping with pure disgust. "Did you not just hear the man?" He pointed a sharp finger at Harrison. "He is the managing partner. Your sister is the executor. Your parents did not just make a banking error. They committed massive fraud. They stole hundreds of thousands of dollars and they got caught." Sylvia gasped, placing the hand over her chest as if she had been physically struck. "Jared, how dare you speak to us this way? We brought you into this family. We welcomed you. You brought me into a massive liability." "Sylvia," Jared shot back, his voice rising enough to draw even more attention from the surrounding tables. "You told me Courtney had a secured multi-million-dollar trust. You told me her lifestyle brand was generating revenue. You promised me that if we got married, the guest wing of that compound would be signed over to us as a wedding gift. It was all a complete lie. You people are totally broke." Howard tried to stand up, attempting to muster whatever shredded remnants of his intimidating authority remained. "See here, young man, you will show some respect." "Respect what?" Jared mocked, letting out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Your empty bank accounts. Your fake country club medical bills. I am not attaching my name to a family that is about to be indicted by the Internal Revenue Service. I am not taking on your debts. I have a career to protect. I have my own reputation to maintain." I sat back in the leather booth and watched the spectacular implosion unfold. I did not have to say a single word. I had simply presented the truth, and the toxic, fragile ecosystem my family had built was rapidly consuming itself. Jared was doing the work for me, dismantling Courtney's entire reality right in front of my eyes. Courtney stood up frantically, grabbing the lapels of Jared's suit jacket. "You cannot say these things. We are getting married. We are a team. We can figure this out. We can just ask Fiona to release the funds. She is my sister. She has to help us." She turned her panicked, desperate gaze toward me. For a moment, she actually believed that appealing to my familial duty would work. She genuinely thought that after spending her entire life mocking me, treating me like a servant, and conspiring with our mother to steal my inheritance, I would simply open the vault to save her relationship. I looked back at her with absolute unwavering indifference. I did not offer a single shred of comfort. Jared forcefully peeled Courtney's hands off his jacket, pushing her away with a look of utter revulsion. "She is not going to help you, Courtney. She is going to press charges against your parents. She holds all the money, and she is the only person at this table who actually earned any of it." In a deeply surreal moment, Jared turned his attention to me. He straightened his posture, adjusting his cuffs, and attempted to offer me a look of sleazy, opportunistic respect. It was the look of a man recognizing the true apex predator in the room and desperately trying to signal that he was not the enemy. He realized that I possessed the massive wealth he had been chasing all along. "You played this brilliantly, Fiona," Jared said, his tone shifting into a slick, almost admiring cadence. "I have to respect the strategy. You completely outmaneuvered them. I had absolutely no idea you were holding the keys to the entire estate." I stared at him, my expression radiating pure, freezing contempt. I did not want his respect. I found his sudden pivot even more repulsive than my family's blatant greed. He was a parasite attempting to detach from a sinking ship and latch onto a stronger host. "Do not speak to me, Jared," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "You are just as pathetic as they are. You wanted a free ride on my grandmother's dime. You wanted to live in a luxury house funded by my life savings. You are a grifter who just realized the ATM is permanently broken." Jared's brief attempt at an alliance evaporated instantly. His face flushed a dark, angry red, realizing that his charming facade held absolutely zero currency with me. He was completely exposed, recognized as nothing more than a shallow gold digger. He turned back to Courtney, who was now trembling uncontrollably, her chest heaving with loud, erratic sobs. "The wedding is off," Courtney, Jared declared with brutal finality. "I am canceling the venue. I am calling my family and telling them not to book their flights. I am absolutely done with this circus." "No, Jared, please," Courtney wailed, dropping all pretense of dignity. She reached for him again openly, begging in the middle of the upscale restaurant. "You cannot do this. I love you. We are supposed to be together. What am I supposed to tell my friends? What am I supposed to do?" "That is your problem," Jared sneered. "You better start looking for a real job because the influencer lifestyle is officially over." Without another word, without a single backward glance, Jared turned on his heel. He adjusted his jacket one last time, squared his shoulders, and marched straight toward the front exit of the bistro. The heavy glass doors swung open, and he disappeared into the bright midday sun of the financial district, abandoning his fiancée without a shred of hesitation or remorse. Courtney collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. A loud, hysterical wail tore from her throat, echoing painfully through the quiet dining room. She was completely broken. Her glamorous wedding, her luxury lifestyle, her perfect relationship, and her unearned social status had all vanished in the span of 5 minutes. She was left with absolutely nothing. Sylvia rushed to Courtney's side, wrapping an arm around her sobbing daughter, but Sylvia's own eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. The reality of their total isolation had finally breached her defenses. There was no one left to blame. There was no one left to manipulate. The slick, wealthy son-in-law they had proudly paraded around the country club had just publicly humiliated them and walked out the door. They were sitting in the wreckage of their own making, surrounded by the shattered pieces of their fraudulent empire. The dominoes had fallen exactly as I had planned, crushing their illusions with absolute devastating precision. And the reckoning was still not over. The heavy glass doors at the front of the bistro swung shut behind Jared, sealing his departure with a definitive muffled thud. His exit left a massive, suffocating vacuum at our table. Courtney continued to sob uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands, completely shattered by the instant evaporation of her glamorous future. But my focus remained locked on my mother. Sylvia was staring at the space where Jared had just been standing, her mouth slightly open, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The reality of her total, inescapable isolation had finally breached her carefully constructed defenses. There was no one left to blame. There was no one left to manipulate. The slick, wealthy son-in-law they had proudly paraded around the country club had just publicly humiliated them and walked out the door. My father, Howard, sat slumped in his chair, completely neutralized by the threat of federal prison and the overwhelming presence of Harrison sitting calmly across from him. Howard looked down at his expensive leather shoes entirely broken, possessing absolutely zero leverage to negotiate his way out of this disaster. Sylvia slowly turned her head to look back at me. I watched the physical transformation happen in real time. The aggressive high society matriarch who had stormed into this restaurant demanding obedience completely melted away. Her posture crumbled. The rigid, haughty set of her shoulders collapsed inward. Her face, usually so tight with judgment and aristocratic disdain, suddenly slackened into an expression of raw, naked panic. She looked old. She looked remarkably small. For the first time in my entire 33 years of existence, I saw genuine, unadulterated fear in my mother's eyes. She was not acting. She was not putting on a performance for the surrounding tables. The affluent audience watching our booth no longer mattered to her. The impending threat of homelessness and IRS audits had finally pierced through her blinding narcissism. Sylvia reached across the polished wood of the bistro table. Her hands were shaking violently, the heavy diamond rings on her fingers rattling against each other. She tried to grab my hand, attempting to force a physical, maternal connection that had never genuinely existed. I smoothly pulled my hand back, resting it on top of my leather briefcase. I did not recoil. I simply removed myself from her reach, establishing a firm, impenetrable physical boundary. Sylvia let out a ragged, desperate sob. Real tears began to stream down her face, ruining her meticulous makeup and carving dark tracks through her expensive foundation. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, entirely dropping her aggressive facade. She was drowning, and she was frantically reaching for the only life raft left in the ocean. "Fiona, please!" Sylvia begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please, sweetheart, you have to listen to me. We are your family. We are your blood. You cannot do this to us. You cannot leave us like this." I sat perfectly still, my expression a mask of cold, clinical indifference. I watched her weaponize her tears, analyzing her behavior with the same detached precision I used to audit fraudulent bank statements. Sylvia swallowed hard, struggling to catch her breath. She wiped frantically at her wet cheeks. "I know things got a little heated yesterday. I know we said some things we did not mean. But we can fix this. We can forgive this, Fiona. You are just upset. You are just feeling overwhelmed by the move and the finances. We completely understand." I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer breathtaking audacity of her words. She was sitting in front of a 50-page legal dossier, proving she had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from a dead woman's estate. She was currently facing federal tax evasion charges and total financial ruin. Yet her narcissistic brain was still desperately trying to frame the situation as my emotional failing. She was actually offering to forgive me for discovering her crimes. She was still trying to diminish my calculated tactical strike as a mere emotional outburst from an upset, overwhelmed daughter. I did not interrupt her. I let her continue digging her own grave. Sylvia leaned further across the table, lowering her voice into a frantic conspiratorial whisper. "Just unfreeze the account so we can pay the movers and you can have the master guest suite back. I promise, Fiona. We will tell Courtney she has to find her own space for a nursery. You can have the entire wing to yourself. You will have your own entrance. You can work in peace. Just call the bank right now and turn the cards back on. Please, we need to get to the new house." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, a woman who had spent my entire adult life treating me like an unpaid servant and a disposable utility. I processed the sheer insulting absurdity of her grand bargain. I had just proved that she was a common thief. I had just demonstrated that I held absolute legal control over a multi-million-dollar financial empire. And her ultimate desperate concession was to offer me a bedroom in a house that I had paid for. She genuinely believed that allowing me to live in the guest wing of my own property was a fair trade for ignoring massive federal fraud. She did not comprehend the reality of her situation. She still thought we were haggling over living arrangements. She did not realize that the house deal was already a corpse and the money was never ever coming back. I glanced over at Harrison. He was watching the exchange with quiet, intense observation. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of absolute professional respect. He knew I did not need his help to finish this. He knew I was fully capable of delivering the final blow on my own. I slowly placed both of my hands on the edge of the table and pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped softly against the floor. I stood up. Rising to my feet completely shifted the power dynamic in the room. I was no longer sitting across from them as an equal or a subordinate. I was towering over them. I looked down at Sylvia, Howard, and Courtney. They looked like terrified, cornered animals. Howard was still staring at the floor. Courtney was still weeping into her hands. Sylvia was staring up at me, her tear-streaked face frozen in a mask of desperate, pathetic hope, waiting for me to pull out my phone and save her. I reached into the pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer. I bypassed my phone. Instead, I pulled out my slim leather wallet. I opened it and extracted a single crisp $100 bill. I held the bill between my index and middle fingers. I extended my arm and placed the money deliberately in the exact center of the table, letting it rest right on top of the heavy spiral-bound forensic audit report. The bright green currency stood out sharply against the stark white cover of the dossier. "That is to cover my salad and my iced tea," I said, my voice resonating with cool, absolute finality. "I am not paying for anyone else." Sylvia looked from the $100 bill back up to my face. The desperate hope in her eyes began to fracture rapidly, replaced by the horrifying realization that her bargaining tactics had completely failed. "Fiona, what are you doing?" Sylvia gasped, her voice trembling violently. "Where are you going? The movers are waiting. The attorneys are waiting." I picked up my leather briefcase, wrapping my fingers tightly around the sturdy handle. The weight of the bag felt incredibly grounding. It held my laptop, my future, and the absolute destruction of their fraudulent empire. I looked directly down into my mother's terrified, weeping eyes. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel guilt. I felt the pure, unadulterated liberation of a woman who had finally excised a toxic tumor from her life. "You told me not to come back, Mom," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the silent restaurant. "I am just honoring your wishes." Sylvia opened her mouth to scream, to beg, to launch into another hysterical plea, but I cut her off with a surgical, devastating strike. "Harrison's legal team will be in touch regarding the repayment of the embezzled $400,000, I declared, ensuring every single patron in the immediate vicinity heard the exact dollar amount she had stolen. "Do not contact me again." I did not wait for her response. I did not look at Howard's defeated posture or Courtney's shaking shoulders. I turned on my heel, my sleek black leather heels pivoting sharply on the tile floor. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked away from the table. The entire bistro watched me leave. I walked through the main dining room with the steady, measured stride of a conquering general leaving a decimated battlefield. The affluent patrons parted slightly as I navigated through the tables, their eyes wide with shock and quiet awe. No one spoke. No one intervened. They simply watched a woman take absolute, uncompromising control of her own destiny. I pushed open the heavy glass doors at the front of the restaurant and stepped out into the bright, brilliant sunshine of the financial district. The warm afternoon air washed over my face, carrying the sounds of city traffic and bustling pedestrians. I took a deep, full breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, intoxicating scent of total freedom. I did not look back at the restaurant. I did not look back at the wreckage I had left behind. I walked confidently down the busy pavement, stepping purposefully into the reality I had finally chosen for myself. 6 months passed, with the brutal absolute efficiency of a perfectly balanced ledger. The federal fraud investigation initiated by Harrison's legal team had left my parents with two highly distinct choices. They could face criminal indictment and certain prison time for embezzling from the Beatrice Trust, or they could sign an ironclad restitution agreement that required the total immediate liquidation of every single asset they possessed. Staring down the barrel of federal prosecution, they chose the latter. The sprawling suburban house was sold. The luxury cars were repossessed. The designer jewelry and high-fashion wardrobes were auctioned off to the highest bidder. Today, Sylvia and Howard live in a cramped, outdated two-bedroom apartment in a noisy complex located right next to a major commercial highway. There are no vaulted ceilings, no custom draperies, and absolutely no guest wings. To meet their aggressive monthly restitution payments to the estate, they were forced to enter the workforce for the very first time in decades. My mother, who once berated retail workers for sport and treated service staff like invisible peasants, now folds discounted sweaters at a mid-tier department store in a local suburban mall. She spends 8 grueling hours a day on her feet, wearing a stiff polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. She is forced to smile and apologize to angry customers who toss clothes onto the floor she just meticulously organized. The ultimate humiliation came last month when several women from her former country club walked into her department. Sylvia had to stand behind the cash register and ring up their purchases while they stared at her in profound, pitying silence. Howard works the customer service desk at a large chain hardware store. He spends his long shifts arguing with aggressive contractors over return policies and sweeping the dusty aisles. He has been stripped entirely of his expensive tailored suits, his premium scotch, and his unearned arrogance. He wears a bright orange vest over a cheap polo shirt. The man who used to confidently forge medical documents to fund his elite golf habit now spends his weekends soaking his aching feet in a plastic tub, too exhausted to even complain about the noise from the highway outside his thin apartment windows. Courtney did not fare much better. Jared had completely ghosted her the exact moment he walked out of that upscale bistro. He blocked her phone number, canceled the luxury wedding venue, and immediately moved on to his next wealthy target. Left without a trust fund, without a fake business account, and without a husband to bankroll her influencer delusions, my sister was violently forced to face reality. She now works as a junior receptionist at a mid-sized logistics firm. She answers phones, coordinates mail deliveries, and fetches coffee for executives who are exactly the same age she is. Her social media accounts have been completely abandoned. The glamorous, highly curated life she stole from my grandmother's legacy evaporated the second she actually had to pay for it herself. She takes the public bus to work every morning, carrying a worn canvas tote bag instead of a designer purse. I did not keep the recovered $400,000 for my own personal luxury. I did not buy a sports car, and I certainly did not buy a membership to a country club. I took the recovered funds, combined them with my own substantial career earnings, and built something that Grandma Beatrice would have actually respected. I established a comprehensive financial literacy and legal aid foundation. We provide top-tier forensic accounting services and free legal counsel to women escaping financial abuse. We teach them how to untangle hidden assets, how to rebuild their destroyed credit scores, and how to protect their independence from manipulative spouses or toxic family members. I took the exact skills I had been forced to use to hide my parents' messes and weaponize them for good. We dismantle financial predators every single day. We give women the tools they need to lock their own vaults and secure their own freedom. Tonight, I am standing in the grand ballroom of the City Museum. The massive room is filled with brilliant golden light, soft classical music, and the low, vibrant hum of genuine earned success. It is the inaugural charity gala for my foundation. I am wearing a custom-tailored emerald silk gown. I am not standing in the corner holding a clipboard. I am not balancing spreadsheets in the shadows. I am the host. I look out over the crowded room and see the faces of the women our foundation has helped. I see my brilliant colleagues from the accounting firm. I see Harrison standing near the front table raising a crystal glass of sparkling water in my direction. He looks incredibly proud. I am entirely surrounded by my chosen family. They are people who value my mind, respect my boundaries, and celebrate my victories without ever demanding a piece of my soul in return. I walk up to the podium at the front of the ballroom. The microphone feedback echoes softly before the room falls completely silent. Hundreds of faces turn to look at me with absolute respect. I look out at the audience, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace settling deep into my chest. I think back to that Tuesday afternoon, in my dusty apartment staring at cardboard moving boxes and listening to a voicemail that was meant to utterly break me. My mother told me I was out, that they were moving on without me. It turned out to be the best financial advice she ever gave me. Because the moment I stopped funding their illusion, I finally started investing in my own reality. For years, I operated under the dangerous illusion that compliance would eventually earn me love. I believed that if I balanced the ledgers, perfectly funded their ambitions, and swallowed my pride, my family would finally see my worth. The most profound lesson I learned from my grandmother's trust and my mother's betrayal is this: you cannot buy respect from people who only value your utility. Toxic relationships thrive on your willingness to negotiate your own boundaries. True empowerment begins the moment you stop funding someone else's illusion at the expense of your own reality. Financial independence is not just about having money in the bank, it is the ultimate armor against manipulation. When you control your own resources, you strip abusers of their greatest weapon, which is leverage. Furthermore, I learned that blood does not equate to obligation. Choosing to walk away from toxic relatives is not an act of failure or selfishness. It is the highest form of self-respect. You are absolutely allowed to lock the vault on people who consistently drain your spirit and your accounts. Finally, I learned that family is not something you are simply born into. It is something you choose and create. By walking away from my biological family's extortion, I created space for genuine mentors, colleagues, and friends who celebrate my victories instead of plotting to exploit them. You are the sole executor of your own life. Do not let anyone else hold the keys to your future. Now I want you to take a hard forensic look at your own life. Are you investing your energy into people who build you up, or are you quietly funding someone else's toxic illusion? It is time to cut the cord, secure your own vault, and take back your control. Share your stories of setting ironclad boundaries in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button if you are ready to stop playing the scapegoat and start owning your absolute power.